Dr. Russel Mikkelson, how you doing?
Terrific. Great to be with you, Sean.
It's great to have you. So we have a lot of history. So our history starts in 2004 when I took the job at Ohio State. And it wasn't too much long after that I was subbing at Grove City Church of the Nazarene, and you were playing trumpet in their big band, and so that was a point of collaboration. And we've had a few others. You came and played at New Salem Missionary Baptist Church when I was working there. It was a collaboration between Grove City Church of the Nazarene and New Salem Missionary Baptist Church, which I was working there at that time. And you've been frequently hiring me or recommending that I be hired to play with the Heisey Wind Ensemble, which I've had a good time with that. We also were part of the same Bible study, the faculty Bible study at Ohio State, and that was great. I wrote an arrangement for. Let's see here. You're All I Need, Hezekiah Walker, and we did that with the gospel choir and the was it your band?
Yes.
Yeah, Wind Symphony. That's right. For the celebration concert. Few years back, several years back. Now with this pandemic, of course, everything seems way further back than it actually was. It was just last year that, let's see here, February. You know, I had some concerts in February, and of course I didn't know at that time that was going to be, you know, the significance of those concerts. You know, that the bottom was going to fall out, and you know, no jazz festival, no anything, so. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you grew up and maybe your experience with music and, I mean, in, you know, whatever occurs.
Well, I came to music in probably a different way than most. I grew up on a Wisconsin dairy farm. 24 by 24 farmhouse, and my two brothers and I shared a bedroom. Three of us slept in the same room, while my sister was in the other, my mom and dad in the third bedroom. And so it was not, we were certainly loved, but we were not well-to-do. My dad was a dairy farmer, and my mom became a teacher. And my older brother had a cornet that he was a frustrated cornet player, and the cornet was laying around, and I could tell immediately that I sounded better on that instrument than he did, just kind of flat out tone with no lessons. And I started in the band in 5th grade like a lot of kids, got some lessons, and started playing in church, local talent shows, and I got really, let me tell you specifically, I was in 7th grade, I think, and my band director played for me the MF Horn 2, Maynard Ferguson's Give It One, and I was hooked. I bought that record, went home, and I learned every note that I could, and nobody told me that it was hard to play high. I just figured if he was doing it, I could do it. And I ended up turning into a pretty good lead player through playing along with those albums. MacArthur Park, I did all that Maynard stuff. Big fan of Buddy Rich, Stan Kenton, Toshiko Akiyoshi, Woody Herman. These were the bands that were just touring in the area where my high school buddies and I would drive and hear these concerts. I probably saw Maynard 3 times in the time I was in high school. I remember seeing Al Vizzuti solo with the Woody Herman band. He was playing lead at that time. John Harner, a graduate of The Ohio State University, was my hero as a 16-year-old. His work on Kenton 76 album and the Send in the Clown solo. So I was just completely enamored with big band work and the work of those bands. So I was hooked, and I ended up going to a Stan Kenton clinic. In those years, Stan Kenton's bands were in residence for like weeks at a time. And I went to a Drury College in Springfield, Missouri, where the Kenton band was in residence, to one of these Kenton clinics in 1977. And that was life-changing, to just hang around those musicians, watch them rehearse, get to kind of rub elbows with those guys. It was really terrific. A guy named Clay Jenkins, who was the jazz chair in the Kenton band, was the director of the band that I was playing lead in. So I had a lot of kind of wonderful experiences as a kid, even though I was growing up on a really small town on a dairy farm. My parents were extremely supportive of me and my interest in music. And unfortunately, as you know, I wish all of our students could say that that was the case for them. But I think parents get a shiver up their spine sometimes when their kid tells them they want to go into music. But my parents were extremely supportive, and I think in high school there were two things I wanted to be. I wanted to either be a member of one of those big bands playing in the trumpet section, or I wanted to be a high school band director. And I went to University of Wisconsin Eau Claire, and which has a terrific jazz reputation. We would host jazz festivals every year, and gosh, I got to play with some terrific players: Joe Williams, Plaz Johnson, Bill Berry, Dick Hyman, Eddie Daniels. I mean, the people that were brought into that festival in the years I was in the top jazz band there was amazing. So I got some great experiences there, and I taught for 7 years after that, taught high school band, and my first high school band had 27 kids in it. I was the band director 5 through 12, living above a funeral home in a town of about 600 people. And then after a year of that, I actually got a job at a really terrific high school in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Taught there for 6 years. But that's when my career changed, actually, because there was a jazz director that did jazz district-wide in that school. So I didn't have a jazz band of my own. I conducted the wind ensembles and taught brass and percussion lessons. And the jazz guy, my colleague, did a great job with the jazz bands. He was a reed player, so he taught all the woodwind lessons. So we had a good thing going there. And I did jazz sectionals for the brass section, but none of the bands were my own. So I ended up focusing on conducting, because that's what I was doing. And then that ended up taking my career in a little different direction to get my doctorate at the University of Wisconsin, off to SUNY Fredonia, where I was director of bands for 5 years, my first job as an assistant professor. And then I came to Ohio State in 1998 as associate professor with tenure, promoted to full professor in 2008. So this is year 23 for me at Ohio State, after starting in a little farmhouse in Wisconsin milking cows. So it's quite a journey.
Yeah, that is quite a journey. Now, something that we have in common, I also grew up in the country, and although my father's not a farmer, right immediately behind our yard, there's an electrified fence, was a 80-acre cow pasture, Holstein cows. I was a dairy farmer, and we actually, my dad had a deal with the farmer. I don't know what he was paying him. I don't know what he could have been doing something, accounting work or something for him.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
Something for him, but we went in with our own jug and dipped out our milk, and that's how to milk. And it's funny because when we switched to vitamin D, whole milk, which was in those days was 4%. We were like, oh, vitamin D milk is gross. It's like water, because we had been dipping the real stuff, right?
With all the cream.
That's right. And then we switched from that down to 2%, and then 2% was really like water. This is skim milk. It was that.
Exactly the same experience.
Yeah. Now vitamin D milk is 3.25%, right? So they're even skimping us on that. But grew up on a dirt road. And it's still a dirt road. Parents still live in the same house. I think that our house was probably built in something like 1920 or something like that. But been renovated and built on additions and stuff like that. So, and I grew up with horses and go-karts and four-wheelers and all kinds of stuff. My father did not have that kind of upbringing lifestyle. He grew up very poor. Lived in the projects in Columbus. Actually, was from Columbus, and so he wanted a different sort of situation for his own family. He wanted to get away from. He remembered in his childhood. He remembered the times when he would go out. I think his grandmother. They lived out on a farm, and they had horses or something. And he just every time he visited there, he was like, "Oh, this is what I want for my kids," And so that ended up being, he made that happen. But he was very supportive. Parents are very supportive of music. My sister actually initially went to school for music. There's four of us. It's my older brother. We're all 4.5 years apart. My older brother, and then me, and then my younger sister and brother are twins. So my younger sister, she actually initially went to school for music. But then she started having some issues with vocal nodes, and she changed to pre-med. She's a psychiatrist. She lives around Grand Rapids now. My older brother, he played trumpet, and his nickname is Lightning. Yeah, right. There you go. That's right. We got together and made a storm. And so there was some kind of music. The only one of us that didn't have to do some kind of music, at least until the end of high school, was my younger brother, and that's because he was into basketball. So that was his thing. But yeah. I had mentioned something about this, this pandemic, and how that's sort of, that might have been before we started rolling, and kind of how that's kind of stretched everything out and made everything seem like, everything is like so long ago that, this or that has happened. How has the pandemic affected what it is that you do?
Well, It's so interesting. The day that Governor DeWine announced that everything was going to be shut down, I was supposed to be conducting a concert up at Copley High School, Copley Fairlawn Schools in the kind of Akron area. And I just spent 3 days there working with these students, and we were fired up to do this concert, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon the concert was canceled for that evening.
Yeah.
And that was like, I mean, everything kind of stopped, came to a screeching halt. In addition to my work at Ohio State, I'm music director of the Newark Granville Symphony Orchestra and the Heisey Wind Ensemble. And almost immediately, those concerts were canceled. So I was supposed to go to Taiwan for a week last August, and that didn't happen, obviously. So all sorts of kind of guest conducting work, the Colorado All-State, the New York All-State, all of these kind of guest conducting gigs that I had lined up were gone.
Now let me ask you about that. Did you still get paid for all of that stuff?
So what happened is, in almost all cases, they have rescheduled it for 21-22.
Okay, I see.
Now, Colorado, God bless them, they felt that since I held the date for that long, that if I would make a video for what would have been the 2021 All-State this March, just a kind of a 5-minute encouraging kind of video, a congratulatory kind of video, that they would pay me a portion of my salary, which was very generous. And they also are hiring me back next year.
Yeah.
But none of the other gigs paid anything. They were just flat out canceled.
I asked that because that seems to be something. It's not something that I've heard like on the national news coverage. Like, I've heard almost nothing about how this thing has impacted musicians, artists, how it's affected people that are in the service industries. I've heard almost nothing about how they've been affected. I hear a lot about, and have heard a lot about this this term that I've grown to. Maybe detest is not, maybe that's a little too strong, but it's somewhere in that ballpark, this essential workers terminology, which seems to suggest that what it is that I do is not essential, right? And I can't think of something more essential to life than creating beauty. It seems like that's pretty important.
I think we're realizing the more we're spending time indoors and not able to do the things that we all love to do, I think the community, the society is beginning to realize that the arts and what we do, what that brings to their life. They're getting it through recordings and those kinds of things, but it's clear that they miss coming to live concerts and live performances, going to bars and hearing live music. Those kinds of things aren't happening, and I think that the society is coming to the realization, my gosh, when we take these away, that we really do miss these things, because it brings normalcy and as you say, beauty to life. So I agree with you. About the only thing that I've heard artistically is kind of the fact that the Broadway shows have been shut down, and is that sad? And of course it is. But there's a lot of people that are in this situation that I think more so than just the people that happen to be making their living on Broadway.
Absolutely. So, So I was asking you about how this thing has affected you. How has it affected you in in academia, like with what you do at Ohio State?
Yeah. So until just the last couple of weeks, I actually finally had done my service, but I have been on the national board of the College Band Directors National Association for the last 6 years. Just finished up my presidency of the North Central Division. And we were one of the groups that commissioned a study to figure out what in the world is going on when people blow air through their band instruments, wind instruments in particular, of course. And what does it take to be safe? So the Colorado, Maryland studies were in part commissioned in large part by the CBDNA. And those protocols are mainly the protocols that we have put in place at Ohio State. So I haven't conducted a normal sized band since last February. So the way we have dealt with that is we have taken what would normally be our music majors in several different bands and put them all into one big pool of players. And then we have a COVID max for each room. So one rehearsal room is 15, one rehearsal room can max out at 12. Down at the stadium, where the marching band normally rehearses, that we can get up to 31 students. So we split up our 2-hour rehearsals into basically 6 different periods, 40 minutes each. And basically it's almost all separate personnel. So in any given project, we call it, 4 projects over the course of a semester, we can do 6 different pieces with 6 different sets of personnel, but that doesn't accommodate everybody. So if you're not assigned to a conducted ensemble, then you're assigned to an unconducted ensemble, a quartet, a quintet. And luckily, our academic colleagues were kind enough to teach all of their courses that met during our ensemble time, teach those online, and that freed up all the classrooms. So we're able to put quintets and quartets in that. I met weekly with the grad assistants who would then coach those unconducted ensembles to make sure that, because for a lot of them, that's the first time that they've ever coached a chamber ensemble. So we had to teach them how to do that and how to actually kind of let them work things out and then step in at the right time and not always be rehearsing them like a conductor would. But as a coach, you want to get them to start hearing things themselves. And so we would meet just for like 30 minutes every week just to say, how are things going? Talk to me about what issues that you might have. What questions do you have about coaching, about what successes have you had, those types of conversations. And since a lot of our music majors are music ed majors, we also had them say, okay, there are 4 people in this quartet. For each rehearsal, you're going to, before the rehearsal begins, I want to see a lesson plan, and you're going to submit that to your coach. Otherwise, you're not rehearsing that day. So they had to come in for those 40 minutes having a plan of what they were going to be rehearsing based on what they had done the previous rehearsal. So it gets them thinking a lot more like teachers and about how can I be efficient with these 40 minutes that I have in this unconducted ensemble. So that has actually, I have to say, worked out pretty well. I'm a band director, so I miss conducting the 50 or 60 piece band, but we've gotten to do a lot of Mozart. We've gotten to do a lot of one-on-a-part chamber music that ordinarily we would not be doing, certainly that much one-on-a-part repertoire. And that has made our students really grow in terms of just being individually responsible for their part and individually responsible for listening. And I suspect that when we get back to a time, hopefully in the fall, when we can have full band again, I think this is going to pay huge dividends, because the students that are coming into that ensemble will have learned better about how to listen and how to rehearse through this kind of one-on-a-part ensemble experience.
Very interesting. Sounds like a lot of additional work too, though.
Absolutely. And in addition, we've been, so we don't give them any music. We scan everything and we make them download it onto their iPads. But I also took that opportunity to scan all the scores. So I would give them assignments like, okay, I need you to study the score. I need you to see what's going on here. And I would give them these assignments through Carmen, and then they would have to respond to these prompts. Right now we're working on a Michael Torkey piece called Overnight Mail, which is a terrific kind of jazz inflected piece, but it's in the kind of minimalist style. Torkey would probably be categorized, I suppose, if you had to categorize him, as a post-minimalist. So I just sent out an assignment this week where I said, okay, I want you to listen to this interview with Steve Reich, who is the father of minimalist music, and he's talking about the very first piece that could be categorized as minimalism, called It's Gonna Rain. Oh, and Reich was out and he recorded this preacher who's preaching on Noah and the flood, and this guy's got this voice and he's into it, and he says, it's gonna rain, people, it's gonna rain. And he records this, and right as the pastor says it's gonna rain, this pigeon flies. You hear the flutter of the wings. And Reich is describing how when he tape looped to that he could get the bird taking off such that it sounded like drums, like the rhythm section. And then the guy's going, it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain. And you hear the of the flutter of the wings going on. So all of this manipulation of minimalist music. So I assigned the students to listen to about 12 minutes of this interview with Steve Reich that happened on Fresh Air with Terry Gross on NPR. It's a 39-minute interview, but I said, I want you to listen to the first 12 minutes. And then I said, I want you to, it's just so terrific how he describes his ideas of minimalism and going from tape to live musicians. And then I had them listen to a Short Ride in a Fast Machine of John Adams, and I said, talk to me about how this piece fits into Steve Reich's description of minimalism. And then I had them listen to a different Michael Torkey piece called Adjustable Wrench. And I said, okay, what characteristics do you hear in this piece that are minimalist? And because it's post-minimalism, how is it different? So I'm getting them to really kind of listen the way that a lot of jazz musicians teach. You guys are always asking your students to listen and transcribe solos, and you're listening to styles. I don't think we're very good at that in what we do. And this particular crazy time has allowed us a different way of thinking and teaching. And when I programmed Overnight Mail, I didn't know that I was going to go this direction, but it was just seemed clear to me that the way that Torkey uses a figure, for instance, the piece starts out on count 2, it's in 2/4, it goes ba ba da ba ba da ba ba do ba ba da ba, and then it starts over again, right? So it keeps kind of displacing the same rhythm over and over, but it keeps displacing itself in terms of where it starts in the measure until it finally comes around to be where it is again.
Yeah.
And then there's all sorts of that stuff in Torkey's music, and then he will do that, and then he'll put a canon of 2 parts, 1 beat apart in this exactly the same way, and it's constantly kind of phasing. And then you'll layer over something else, and I just kind of ripped the piece apart that way so they could understand what it is they were playing. And I think this whole Steve Reich minimalist assignment that I gave them this week, I'm hoping that that's just going to give them a lot more sense of contextualizing this music and what it is and where it came from, kind of its evolution. So, I mean, that's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah.
To be able to kind of get into that with your students. And in a normal semester, you know, we'd be putting on full concerts. We just wouldn't have time, frankly, for that. So it's kind of exciting to teach in this way.
So you're a you're very organized. Now, I know this from a few perspectives. I know this because I took conducting lessons with you. And I actually took conducting lessons with you as part of fulfillment of my doctorate. So it was a semester, it was during the summer, but it was a semester long of conducting lessons, which I learned a lot, and a lot of the things that you taught me are stuff that I use regularly. But I also know that because from working with you in the Heisey Wind Ensemble, and then also when I was working at Vineyard Columbus, I had you come in and play on a couple weekends, and just the way. So I see that from different angles. Now, is this sort of sense of organization, does that come naturally, or is that something that you had to sort of develop?
It is definitely something that I had to develop. I think it came from being a high school band director, because there are so many people and parents and other faculty that were depending on me to communicate, and to not only to communicate, but to communicate far enough in advance so that if anything were to go wrong, we could do something about it. I can't think of specific times, but I know that I dropped the ball early on, and I just thought, I don't ever want this to happen again. And I just became a lot more disciplined about it, because I realized that everyone else was counting on me to be organized and to communicate. And if I didn't, it really made me look bad. And then I guess that was probably the early motivation, is I didn't want to look bad in that way. But the real motivation is the more organized you are, the better chance that things are going to go the way you want them to go.
Great.
And then that has transferred itself into being extremely organized and efficient in rehearsal, not wasting people's time saying, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to rehearse from this time to this time on this piece, and this is what we're going to focus on. So that means that what I expect of my students is that they're, for instance, in normal times, Friday afternoon after the last rehearsal, I go in my office and I make out the rehearsal schedule for the next week, and I send it off by email to everybody in the band. And the reason I do that is not so they know, oh, I don't have to come because I don't play on that piece. And I make this point to them, it's because I send that out because I want you to know what my goals are. My goals for you for that Monday rehearsal are X, Y, and Z, and then that means that should focus your preparation to those things, because that's what we're going to be working on. If you're preparing a 50-plus minute concert, you have to focus rehearsals like that. You can't be going over the things that don't need to be gone over. You've got to go over the stuff that needs to be gone over, and then you contextualize. So I found that making the best possible use of my rehearsal time leads to my students being more comfortable when they get to the concert, and the concert generally going better. If I'm up there kind of improvising and riffing, trying to figure out what I'm going to do next, that is not a good place to be in terms of being efficient with your rehearsal time and not wasting people's time. So it's been something that I've learned over the years that, look, if I'm organized, they will prepare better, and then ultimately the product is going to be better. But Circling back to your first question, man, that did not come naturally. That was something I had to fall down and drop the ball, and eventually I figured it out that I have to do better at this. And it wasn't enough to be organized. It was, and I stress this to my students, it's not enough to be organized. You have to be organized so far in advance so that if something goes wrong, you can do something about it. That just makes all the difference, that kind of philosophy.
But doesn't organization, structure, and discipline take the life out of the music?
Not that particular kind of discipline and structure. There's still plenty of opportunity for creativity. Let's put it that way.
Right. Now, you know I'm teasing, because that's always the thing, right? The sort of creative personality is like, yeah, but all of the structure and organization, that's going to take away from, my ability to truly express things. And I've worked at churches, that were more kind of spirit-filled, I suppose is the way to say it, so that people understand what I mean. And there was a lot of resistance towards any kind of structure or organization. I mean, you could say what songs you're going to do, but you couldn't say how you were going to do them. And there was always this thing where, you have to be sensitive to the Spirit, because if the Holy Spirit wants to move it this way, then you have to just be willing to let it go. But the issue I always had with that is that it seems that God is orderly. It seems like he tends to promote things that are disciplined, and that you can predict the way that something is going to happen based on looking back. It seems like that's the way that things are organized. And so then therefore it seems to me to be at least misplaced, this idea that somehow the person that prayed, labored over the organization of a presentation, and believes that is what they believe, that God is telling them through their organization that this is what it's supposed to be, for someone that does not have the same sort of allegiance to structure and organization in the moment to say, you know what, I just felt that God was telling me, or the Spirit was telling me to go this other way, and so I'm drawing this analogy because I believe it to be the same thing, right? So we use this language in spiritual, kind of over spiritualizing things, in church context sometimes. But it really is the same thing, no matter if it's if it's a spiritual context or not.
And the spiritual part of that, and I understand exactly what you're talking about, having played in the group at Grove City, and there are those times when it just seems like, okay, this needs to go longer, but that part's not all that difficult usually. You can almost pre-plan. Look,
right.
If the Spirit moves us, we might repeat this 10 times instead of 6 or whatever.
Right.
And sometimes it was so off the cuff and Spirit moved that somebody just had to kind of turn around and say, we're doing this, we're going here, we're going. That was always a little freaky to me, but I have to, something just popped into my head. It's similar, but quite different at the same time. Years ago, I played a weekend with the circus, 6 shows with the circus in 2 days. No lip left, but I remember the first show, the elephants got up on their back and we turn around, and we go, ta-da, off. And then the conductor yells, nothing in the book, mind you. He says, Blue Moon, E flat, 1, 2. I'm thinking, oh, okay, starts on the 5th, la, da, da, da. I mean, it was like, how in the world do you operate like that? On the show, no music. He just calls out the tune, tells you the key, and gives you 3 beats, and gotta go. I just thought that kind of stuff, that just about put me over the edge, I have to say.
Well, I do agree that you can program for, you can probably predict certain areas of the music that may have a certain impact, right? And that you may want to do longer. Part of it is from experience, right? And then what happened the last time you played the song. But then part of it is just, okay, I'm just going to program some openness so that everything is not necessarily totally structured out, right? And that's my tendency. That's what I try to do when I'm programming, church services, for instance. We have things, we have to do them a certain way. Of course, we're playing with production sequences, and there's not really very much wiggle room, inside the form. But at the end of the song, you can pretty much go wherever you want to go. This kind of is where the idea of a reprise comes from, right? So you can always go back in if it seems like it's good to do so. And sometimes what it is that you have programmed, maybe it's too long. It's like, man, I thought this was going to have more effect here. It's not really having that much effect. So then you can always, the next time you do it, you say, okay, I'm going to make that a sort of, a repeated section or something, and then we can go on if it's not doing anything. But, just the idea, I'm always, it's always a battle because there's always people, especially obviously in the arts, which we're all creatives of different stripes, right? But certain people, they see structure as their enemy, and they want to battle against it at all cost.
I think part of the reason that folks like you and I struggle with that a little bit is that it's one thing for a pianist or a vocalist to have all of that kind of freedom, but when you've got to coordinate, and then you've got to coordinate, a bunch of other players that all have to know where you are at a given time. That gets pretty dicey sometimes.
Yeah, I always say, the bigger the boat, the longer it takes to steer, to turn it around, you can't just, the whole thing's got to move around. And so then therefore, it almost seems to me, and I don't think that people mean it this way, but it almost seems to be pretty selfish almost for one person to decide in the moment, you know what, we're just gonna, hey, let's just unless it's the director, but for just like one person to make that decision unilaterally. A lot of folks have been working on this for a long time. Yeah. You get everybody is there. So, you just made a decision for everyone. And apparently your sensitivity to the spirit, or your sensitivity to what you think the audience is doing it must be much better than everyone else's.
So I'll give you an example of where we have to be flexible, but I've got a full band in front of me, but my organization is what helps us out to make sure that we can be flexible. So every year, usually a couple times a year, I have to conduct commencement. And the commencement in the spring at Ohio Stadium is a big deal. There's 50,000 people there, 10,000, 11,000 graduates. So the band is playing for literally 30, 40 minutes of the processional, right? So then then the faculty and the president, the platform party, come in, and we give them a different processional. But when they get up to the platform and they're all seated and the president is going to turn around and speak, that's the time when the music has to have ended, right? So in this piece that we use, I have safeties. So at every kind of cadence point, I had them draw in a little fermata, and the fermata just tells you to go when to skip to the ending, right? So, and there's one spot during that particular piece where it gets a little bit long between those kind of safety spots where we could jump to the ending. So if I find that we're in the middle of that spot and he's going to be done, I just have to speed up. And it's the most unmusical thing that you've ever heard in your life, but I will speed up because I am not going to be having the president of the university waiting for me with 50,000 people watching that have just been through 40 minutes of a processional. So I organize in these moments and I practice them, and I just say, okay, if I'm doing this, that means that next time you get to one of those penciled in fermatas, we're taking the ending. We're jumping to the ending from that spot. And organizing in that kind of flexibility, to me, is just critical at an event like that.
You know, you made me think of this thing that, and I interviewed Joel Brooks. Joel Brooks he was my pastor when I lived in Kalamazoo. And he hired me first part-time when I was an undergraduate student as a band director at the church at Christian Life Center. And then when I finished my master's degree, my first full-time job was a band director and pastor's assistant. And I worked that job for a year and a half. So anyhow, we've maintained friendship and everything. He's been a strong influence on me, and he was a musician, fine keyboard player. He was a touring pianist, and one thing that he would say is, you have to prepare for spontaneity. And you know, and on its face, preparing for spontaneity seems like almost intuitively it seems absurd. Oh, prepare for spontaneity. You can't prepare for spontaneity. That's against the point. And what I've tried to do with this is, with my students, is I will talk to them about. So, for instance, say if you're playing F major. And I say, okay, I want you to improvise an F major. Okay? I want you to just play whatever you want to play, but all of the notes have to be diatonic to F major. Okay? Okay, go ahead. All right. Great. That sounded really good. Now do it in F sharp. Okay. Now, now the point is that F major, more preparation in F major. Look at all the music that's in F major. That's a very common key. Look at all the band music that's in F major. Very common key. F sharp, not as much. Right? And so so F sharp is like kind of clunky and kind of like you're boxed in and you don't have as many places you can go and stuff, right? But F major, it's like, oh, I'm all over the place. Oh man, I can do anything. You know, I feel liberated. You know, I'm feeling the spirit in F. I'm not feeling the spirit in F sharp, you know. What's going on? So, but that's exactly that principle. It's that in order to be creative, truly creative, you have to know what the structure is. You have to see what the structure is, and then you're making decisions that are maximizing whatever the boundaries are.
Yes.
And
watching this Ken Burns jazz, and he was talking. This particular episode was about Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and that they would go to Minton's Playhouse and they would do all the things that they couldn't do when they were in the kind of big bands, and the experimentation, and they would actually do things in keys that would make the older players that would come to the jam session feel uncomfortable. So on purpose. And I thought, oh my goodness, they were playing in F sharp.
Now, of course, I'm using that as a teaching tool too, to say, hey, if you want to feel more spontaneous in F sharp, then you got to play in F sharp more. You got to prepare in F sharp more, right? And this whole terminology, I have. This is one of my favorite whipping boys. The terminology outside of the box, or out of the box. The problem with that terminology, it's sort of a contradiction in terms, right? So it's not possible to step outside of the principles that govern the box, right? So what it would actually say, if you can find something that is outside of the box, quote unquote, all you're saying is that the box is bigger than you thought it was. Right? Because the same principles govern everything. So are you telling me that if you get outside of the box, all of the natural laws start to invert? It's instantaneous? No, it's the same principles that still are governing things. So what that necessarily means is that there is no such thing as outside of the box. You might not know how big the box is. Your perspective might be too small to see the extremity of the box, but the box isn't. There is no outside of the box. It's a contradiction in terms. Maybe what it means is that we have to. I think it's a way to sort of poke a hole at structure and organization and discipline when people try to so quickly go to this outside of the box thing. Well, you haven't actually explored all the things that you actually have control of yet. So now all of a sudden you're trying to, let's throw all that stuff out and let's throw caution to the wind and let's just jump over here blindly, right? But even if you find something, it's not because the box, your proximity to the box changed. It's, so anyhow,
I love how you put that, Sean. That's in some cases I think people view their box as too small. Right. They're a box inside a box inside a box inside a box, and when they are getting outside the box, they're just realizing that, okay, I can make my box bigger.
Yeah.
And as you say, I think the same principles apply. They just have kind of expanded what it is they can do. Now they can play in F sharp because they've expanded their box.
I always like too that there's something that again, this seems to be a sort of anti-preparation, anti-organization, anti-practicing, anti-discipline kind of argument, where certain people will look at people like Miles Davis or Thelonious Monk, and they'll say, you know what? See, you don't have to have a lot of technique. Look at what they were able to do, right? Now, of course, you and I know that this is false, right? Miles went to Juilliard. So that means that you have lots of chops. If you listen to, Charlie Parker records, some of the early records with Miles sounds like Diz. Mm-hmm. Right? If you can sound like Diz, then you have a lot of chops.
Absolutely.
Right. And the same thing can be said about Thelonious Monk. Monk, you hear him on those Charlie Parker records, and you swear up and down it's Bud Powell. But it's Monk. If you can sound like Bud Powell, then you have a lot of chops. Then you could really play. So that stuff is just false. Now, because they chose to do something different with that, Miles choosing to, play with more space, and Monk being intentionally quirky, and using that as the way that he sort of, expressed his, musical ideas. But he had already he had mastered the bebop vocabulary. So had Miles. So whatever it is that they decide to do later, you can't pretend that mastery was not part of their journey, right?
Absolutely. It makes me think of the kind of minimalist approach that Count Basie takes at the piano, right? I can't believe that Count Basie didn't have all sorts of chops on the piano, but because he just plays a couple of notes here and there, people think he doesn't have chops. I'm sorry, I just don't think that's true. And he
It's
picked
not true.
exactly the right notes.
Yeah, it's but when people look at things, the kind of assessments that they make about different artists or whatever, I think it reflects more on maybe their own inadequacies than it does on on reality, right? All right, so you're a family man. And one thing, which is something I really appreciate and respect, I admire, and often is the case that almost every, it seems like at least half of them, but maybe most of them, of the Heisey Wind Ensemble rehearsals, your wife would be out in the audience, for rehearsals, right? And I think you told me, we were talking one time, and you were talking about how it's somewhat of a hobby of yours, or something that you really enjoy, this sort of designing your house and having it built. And you've done that a few times, or a couple times, or something. You can jump in wherever you want with that.
So, as you know, we're all really, really busy, just ridiculously busy, and in normal times. And since I conduct the Heisey Wind Ensemble, it means that most Monday nights, I'm driving to Newark and don't get home until, a little before 11. So rather than not seeing my wife at that time for that whole evening, I just say, you know what, honey, I'll pick you up at your school. She's an elementary school teacher. I'll pick you up. We'll drive out to Newark. We'll have dinner out there somewhere. And then I'll do the rehearsal, and she just sits out in the hall, and you've seen her correcting papers and doing whatever work she can to keep up for what she's got going on the next day. And then between dinner, the drive out there, and the drive back, we get to have some time together. And I think that's just one example of valuing your time with your spouse and your family. I've got 2 adult children. My son just had his 33rd birthday. He's my baby. My daughter is a couple years older. And we have 4 grandchildren, and they're all relatively close here, within 30-minute drive. So we get to see them a lot. And that's it's a stabilizing factor in my life to have a sense of family, and what John Adams would call ballast, right? It keeps me centered, it keeps me on the ground. And it's all about your perspective and the things that you value and the things that you hold dear. And it's really easy to get so involved in your job that you don't think about family because you're so busy. I don't know that I've ever actually really figured it out, but I certainly have friends who have not figured it out. As soon as they decided to retire, they didn't know what to do with themselves because their job was who they are. And I like to believe that as a family man and as a Christian, that I know who I am and I know whose I am.
Oh, yeah.
And that is a stabilizing force that kind of keeps one centered and tries to keep things in perspective. And it's not easy, but it's certainly something I've tried to do, especially as I've gotten older.
As a man, so much of our value is wrapped up in our ability to provide, our ability to do something. But we are not human doings, we're human beings. And I think I probably got that from Pastor Brooks also. And it's a real challenge. The whole balance thing that you're talking about is a real challenge, because you spend all of this time practicing and developing, and growing as a musician, and you spend all this time and you have to do more than other people do to make a certain kind of income, right? I often tell my students that when everyone else is on, you're on. When everyone else is off, you're on. That's the life of a musician. If you're successful, then when other people are getting married, you'll be playing in the band. When it's holiday time, you'll be playing a bunch of holiday parties. When everybody else is off of work because they have 9-to-5 jobs, that's when your gigs start. And I think it takes a special person to understand that, as far as a spouse, and not to see that as some sort of competition, and I'm in my second marriage. So and I'll take whatever blame is due to me. But it is not it's not necessarily a given that people are going to really understand that and be willing to give you the kind of space that you need to be able to. I believe I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I believe, music is my calling, right? Education, the stuff that I do, I believe that that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And, yeah, so.
I'd learned to say no on rare occasion. And what you're describing, Sean, growing up the son of a dairy farmer, there are no days off.
Yeah.
Guess what? Every morning, every night, doesn't matter if it's Christmas, Easter, your son's birthday, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's your birthday. You're going to have to milk the cows morning and night, and they have to be fed. That's just the way it is. So, you kind of learn a work ethic when you are in that type of setting. And then as a musician, you have to have a work ethic. So I think it's hard for musicians generally who are constantly clawing and scraping to get the next gig, and yes, to have a little extra income, give you a little breathing room, if nothing else, income-wise. And there's a satisfaction with those gigs as well, right? Even being asked to do the gig is sometimes there's a sense of satisfaction. I know that when I get asked to do all-state bands, that's enormously satisfying to think that, gosh, the directors in New York State want me to come back and do the all-state again. And, you know, there is a satisfaction in that. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes sometimes you just have to say no. And just for the sake of yourself and your health and your self-care, but also knowing that there's got to be some time for your wife and the family. So that's hard. That's hard for a musician, especially, to turn down a gig.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there may be this sort of lack of understanding with respect to. So here's the sort of the example that I sometimes use with this. You know, and this has happened to me, and it's happened to most musicians, you know, that I know. You go to some private party, and you're not playing; you're just attending the party. You know, maybe it's like a house party, right? You go to the house party, and at some point, you know, some of the people already know what it is that you do for a living, but somebody finds out that you're a musician, and they're like, "Hey, you should have brought your horn with you." Right?
You're a doctor. You should have brought your medical bag with you.
Exactly. I always go to the plumber thing, though. I say, "Hey, man, this toilet in here, man. You know, you should have brought your." You know, I think that people, they don't get the sense that this actually is work. It is a job. And because I enjoy aspects of it, that doesn't take away from the fact that it is a job. And also, I think there's this misconception that if you go on a tour, or if you travel, you do a few gigs out of town or something, that there's some sort of glamour or some sort of look, when I did a 2-week tour, it was a European tour with the Basie band, and I've done a few tours with them, but that tour was a long tour. It was rigorous. We had one day off the whole tour, and mostly what I saw was the inside of a hotel room, or a bus, or a plane, or an airport, or the concert venue. That was what the gigs were. Now I was in England, and we had a day off, and so I was actually able to go around and took some pictures and stuff. It was me and Frank Green, the great lead trumpet player, and we've got there's actually a bunch of them on my Facebook, but I interviewed him also as part of this series. But I think there's I think people don't understand what's actually going on, that this actually is work, and the sleeping is terrible. I mean, first of all, I don't sleep well if I'm not in my own bed, let alone doing a gig. You get back to the hotel at 1 a.m. and you can sleep for 2 hours, literally 2 hours, and then you have to get up so you can get on the bus to catch the plane. And that's just regular stuff. That's what's going on. Now, do I enjoy playing? Do I love playing? Of course I love playing. I wouldn't endure that if I didn't. but it's not sort of the inverse of that, which I think is what people imagine. Mm-hmm. That, oh yeah, you're just, whining and dining, doing whatever you want to do, having a grand old time.
Yeah, it's a little like a conductor, what do you actually do up there on that podium with that stick? You know, do they actually follow you? And, you know, they say, man, you get paid really well for like an hour and a half of work. And I'm thinking, you have no idea how much study for every single piece that I have to do in order to get on the podium and know what I'm doing and
Facts.
how this music should go. I mean, it's ridiculous. Somebody asked me one time, what does it take you to do a typical kind of masterworks type concert, right? From a score study standpoint, where maybe there's a Beethoven symphony, an overture, a piece with a soloist. I said, that's probably about 150 hours of score study, if it's music that I have not done before. And as an orchestra conductor, it's almost all music that I haven't conducted before, because I've been a band director my whole life. Now, I love this new thing that I'm doing with the Newark Granville Symphony, but when I come to Beethoven 4, it's going to take me a long time to figure that out and to play and study and think about how this music should go and how am I going to rehearse it? How do I teach that so that I can get it done in, 4 rehearsals? So it's a lot of work. And the trips I take with the marching band, I mean, goodness, that's very much like the schedule that you just had. We'll get done with a game, get back to a hotel, get a couple hours sleep, and then back on the bus to catch the plane. It's always this kind of operating on almost no sleep kind of situation. And it's like, oh, you got to go to the bowl game. Well, yeah, that's terrific. Of course, but you have no idea what that was actually like from the beginning, right? I mean, 2 years ago, I think we left on Christmas Day, right? That sound cool, right? Not to be with your family on Christmas Day. Well, guess what? We had to do that because that's when the bowl game was. And you get past that kind of stuff, I guess, but it's your job, right? That's what you got to do.
So, you were, I guess, what was it? Was the whole scandal with Waters, with the marching band, and then after that, it was you and another person that were basically directing the marching band.
Yeah. My associate director of band, Scott Jones, and I stepped in and we're in charge of the marching band. Chris Hoke, who's the current director of the marching band, stayed on the staff, and he wrote all the drill. I was mostly responsible for music. I think I was responsible for all the pre-games and 4 shows. And then I took the other shows and I split them amongst the staff to have them be kind of the principal conductor and the principal rehearser of the music for those shows, because I was still doing my regular job, conducting the Wind Symphony and teaching graduate conducting. And so I tried to split the load up among the staff, and it was all hands on deck that year from a lot of standpoints. And of course, that's the year that it's the longest season that we'd ever had, because it was the first year of this football playoff, and we go to the national championship and win. So I didn't think the season was ever going to end, and that was a year that we were also playing the National College Band Directors Association convention in Nashville. We made a CD that year. I mean, it was crazy. By the time I got to the end of that year, I felt like I had aged by 5 years.
Well, one thing I remember bumping into you because, frankly, your office is right by the elevator.
Yes.
Yes, I ride the elevator, but I also go to the gym 5 days a week, so I can ride the elevator. And my office is on the 4th floor. So, but I bumped into you as I was getting on the elevator, and I just remember asking you, and this was during that year. I was like, how are you doing, or something, and I just remember, because you're usually pretty upbeat and everything, and I could just tell you were just beat up. I could tell you were just really beat up, and we talked for a couple minutes or something about it. And but one thing I noticed was after that was over, you dropped a bunch of weight, and I asked you about that. So what did you do to lose weight like that? Because what was it? How much? Because I can't remember how much you lost. It was like what, 50 pounds or something?
50 pounds, yeah.
Wow.
So that if I ever write my memoirs, the year 2014 into 2015 will be a fairly extensive chapter. It was without a doubt the most difficult year of my teaching career because of the things that went on, the circumstances around which I stepped in to help out the marching band, yet the general public didn't really see it that way as me helping out. They chose to blame me for my friend John Waters' firing, which was just an amazing thing. You know, people are going to believe what they're going to believe. From my perspective, I was simply trying to step in to help our students in the marching band. Otherwise, they simply would have not had a season.
Yeah.
There's nothing like, getting booed at Skull Session to kind of lift your spirits. So it was a hard time, and I spent a lot of time with my pastor. I spent a lot of time in prayer. I got some help and made it through. But as a result of a lot of that, I was unhealthy. I didn't have time to exercise. And honestly, I'm not sure that I was really great about it prior to that, but that certainly exacerbated the situation. And when that was over, I just said, okay, I got to do something. And I got the Weight Watchers app, and I literally exercised 5 days a week, about 60 minutes a day on the treadmill. And I just went, I was obsessive about losing the weight. And I've been pretty good. During the school year, things always creep up a bit for me, and then I have to kind of do something about it when school's out and I have the summer to kind of get my weight back down. But I've been much better. Actually, it's one thing that the pandemic has helped, because I've got a treadmill in my basement, and I've been really pretty good about just kind of, when I don't have to drive a half hour, 40 minutes into work and back every day, suddenly I've got a little more time, and I'm not doing the Heisey Wind Ensemble and a lot of the concerts and things that I normally would conduct. So it's just made self-care a lot easier. It was just Weight Watchers, watching what I ate, and being really incredibly motivated to lose the weight. I play golf, and I never use a cart. I walk 18 holes every time I play, and I'll play a couple, maybe 3 times a week if I'm lucky. And then on the opposite days, I'm doing the treadmill. So it's all about, that's basically how I did it. Just a lot of motivation and having a little time to actually do it.
Yeah. So, I'm a health advocate. I'm pro, especially musicians working out or doing something, because there's far too many of us that, okay, for instance, the term musician's physique. That the first image that comes in your mind is not someone with a low percentage of body fat. And so I think doing what we can do to try to change that through this pandemic, you know, there are some pluses. There have been some pluses living in a red state, okay, with respect to the gym. Okay, I go to the gym, right? My dad lives in a blue state in Michigan, and they only fairly recently opened the gyms and then have started finally to sort of loosen some of their rules in the gym. In Ohio, the gym opened back. It was they were all closed for 2 months. Opened back for maybe a little more than 2 months. Opened back the day after Memorial Day, and have been open continuously since then. Now, they had to, change the way that they were doing things and at lower capacity and stuff like that. But I'll tell you, as a person that has struggled with anxiety, the gym has been something of critical importance for me to maintain, not just from a physical perspective, but from a mental perspective. It's just, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of stuff to have to do and a lot of things trying to balance. And I am not yet in my career, I am not yet at the place where I can tell people no. I'm just stating facts. I'm not really in the place where I can tell people no. So when people offer me an opportunity, I need to find ways to move things around and juggle more balls, get more balls in the air. And it can be very stressful. And prolonged stress is not really a positive thing. At least the working out helps me to burn some of that off and to So
when I was getting therapy, that was actually during 14-15. My guy said, look, you need to get exercising, because he said the things that make you feel the way that you feel is like jet fuel inside your body. You feel it like right in your chest. And that exercise will burn that off, and you will feel better mentally. He was right, and now it's both a health thing and a mental thing. It just makes me feel better. I'm a morning exerciser, so I try to get my 60 minutes on a treadmill like the first thing I get out of bed. I'm going to go do that. And by the time I start teaching, I've already accomplished a lot in my day. I'm already feeling good.
Yeah. And that's the same thing that I suggest to my students. If you work out in the morning, even if the rest of the day is dog crap, you at least got something that is significant, that's going to that's positive, and is going to pay dividends. Something that's going to be, it's a good thing, right? Yeah. All right, so the last thing I did want to ask you about, I kind of asked before, but we kind of just went where the conversation went, which is great. And that is so you said about golf. You said golf has been I suppose, would you call it a hobby then?
Yeah, I'm an avid golfer. I'm not a great golfer, but it's both getting out and getting that exercise, which, when I walk 18, my Fitbit tells me that's about a 5.5 to 6 mile walk.
Oh, yeah.
And I push my clubs on the cart. And the other thing that it does for me is I'm usually golfing with friends.
Oh, yeah. So socializing. Yeah. Yeah.
And being able to golf with my colleagues at school that like to golf, it's just, I don't know, it's fun. It's fun to be able to be with those people and try to get better and get exercise at the same time, be out in the outdoors. Nobody can get at me. I turn my cell phone off. It's a good thing. Nobody emails me because I turn my cell phone off the whole time. We have a $5 fine if anybody talks about work on the golf course.
There you go. And then, like I said, the thing about having your house built and all of the details involved in that. So what? No. Frankly, I think I understand part of why. Part of the psychology of someone that would want to design their own house, and I think I know you well enough to understand an aspect of that. But can you talk a little bit about that?
From the beginning of our marriage, we've always been kind of new house people, and I don't know why that is. It just is. And when we decided to move from Hilliard to Delaware, it was to be nearer to our grandkids. We live about a 6 or 7 minute drive from our grandkids right now in this home. But, we wanted to do it right. There are certain things that we wanted in the house that would give us flexibility. The creativity aspect of, well, what if we, did this, did that? What if we did one less bedroom or one more bedroom? What if we, there are a lot of decisions to make, and there are a lot of decisions to make once you have the house part right. Then there's a lot of decisions to make about, well, what are the cabinets going to look like? And what are we going to go with granite? Or are we going to go with something else? It's a million decisions, which,
all right, band director.
Exactly, right? That's what you do. It's constantly decisions after decision. But we love the space. We love the fact that we can go out our backyard and we're on the 11th green and of this particular golf course. And it's just a great place when our grandkids come to visit. If they want to stay overnight, we've got room. It's a bit of a sanctuary for us, frankly, especially now that we're kind of eyeing retirement. And it's been a really great place to live, and it's just great to kind of be in a space that you feel comfortable in. And I know that both of us really enjoy. Now we've been in the house for, I think, 7 years. It's been great. We're really grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Well, man, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate your time and your energy.
It's my pleasure. I love doing this, and I'm looking forward to kind of checking out some of the other podcasts that you've done with other guests.
Yeah, it's been a this is episode 124.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it all started when I realized that almost everyone that I would want to interview would be available.
There's that.
When I found that out, I was like, oh, I've wanted to do this. All right, let's go. So, and it's kind of kept me sane too. And you're talking about, golf for, hanging out and being with folks that you enjoy. Same thing here. I've had an opportunity to interview people that I admire and respect, and people that I haven't been in touch with for a long time, and people that I've had some sort of connection with over the years. One thing that is a problem with doing a lot of gigs and having so much stuff happening all the time is there's not really a time to sort of celebrate. And I've realized that I haven't done particularly a good job of celebrating and or even reminiscing on just stuff that's been like really big, great stuff with people that I really love, admire, respect, and so this has been an opportunity to do some of that.
Well, thanks, Sean. I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate you.
All right, man. Well, God bless you.
Thank you. See you, man.
All right, I'll see you. Bye.